Cribbage or crib is a card game, traditionally for two players, that involves playing and grouping cards in combinations which gain points. It can be adapted for three or four players. Cribbage has several distinctive features. The cribbage board used for score, keeping the eponymous crib, box, or kitty in parts of Canada, a separate hand counting for the dealer, two distinct scoring stages to play in the show, and a unique scoring system including points for groups of cards. That total 15. It has been characterized as Britain's national card game and the only one legally playable on licensed premises, pubs and clubs, without requiring local authority permission. The game has relatively few rules, yet yields endless subtleties during play, which accounts for its ongoing appeal and popularity. Tactical play varies depending on which cards one's opponent has played, how many cards in the remaining pack will help the hand one holds, and what one's position on the board is. A game may be decided by only a few points, or even a single point, and the edge often goes to an experienced player who utilizes strategy, including calculating odds and making decisions based on the relative positions of players on the board. Both cribbage and its close relative costly colors are descended from the Old English card game of Noddy. Cribbage added the distinctive feature of a crib and changed the scoring system for points, whereas costly colors added more combinations but retained the original Noddy scoring scheme. According to John Aubrey, cribbage was created by the English poet Sir John Suckling in the early 17th century as a derivation of the game Noddy. While Noddy has become a historical, rarely played game, cribbage has continued unchanged as a popular game in the English-speaking world. The objective of the game is to be the first player to score a target number of points, typically 61 or 121. Points are scored for showing certain jacks, playing the last card for card combinations adding up to 15 or 31, and for pairs, triples, quadruples, cards of the same rank runs sequences of consecutive numbers irrespective of suit, and flushes sets of cards of the same suit. The earliest rules were published in England and appear in Cotgrave 1662 and are soon followed by Willoughby 1672 and Cotton 1674. The continuing popularity of cribbage is due in some part to the influence of the Victorian novelist Charles Dickens, who depicted the game in his novel The Old Curiosity Shop. Cribbage was popular among prospectors in the American West, and the small mining town of Nelson, Montana, to this day has a sign proclaiming it the cribbage capital of the world. Cribbage is played by American submariners serving as a common pastime. The wardroom of the oldest active submarine in the United States Pacific Fleet carries on board the personal cribbage board of World War I submarine commander and Medal of Honor, Submarine Commander and Medal of Honor recipient Rear Admiral Dick O'Kane. And upon the boat's decommissioning, the board is transferred to the next oldest boat. The play proceeds through a succession of hands, each hand consisting of a deal, the play, and the show. At any time during any of these stages, if a player reaches the target score, usually 121, play ends immediately with that player being the winner of the game. This can even happen during the deal, since the dealer scores of a jack is cut as a starter. The players cut for first deal, and the person who cuts the lowest card deals. The dealer shuffles and deals 5 or 6 cards to each player, depending on the number of players. For 2 players, each is dealt 6 cards. For 3 or 4 players, each is dealt 5 cards. In the case of 3 players, a single card is dealt face down in the center of the table to start the crib. Once the cards have been dealt, each player chooses 4 cards to retain, then discards the other 1 or 2 face down to form the crib, also called the box, which will be used later by the dealer. At this point, each player's hand and the crib will contain exactly 4 cards. The player on the dealer's left, or in a 2-player game, the opponent cuts the remaining pack. The dealer reveals the top card of the lower half, called the starter card or cut, and places it face up on top of the reunited pack. If this card is a jack, the dealer scores 2 points for his heels or his nib. Starting with the player on the dealer's left, the players each in turn lay 1 card face up on the table in front of them, stating the count. That is the cumulative value of the cards that have been laid. For example, the first player lays a 5 and says 5, the next lays a 6 and says 11, and so on, without the count going above 31. Face cards, kings, queens, and jacks, count as 10. The cards are not laid in the center of the table as, at the end of the play, each player needs to pick up the cards they have laid. Players score points during the play as follows. If a player cannot play without causing the count to exceed 31, they call go. Continuing with the player on their left, the other players continue the play until no one can play without the count exceeding 31. A player is obliged to play a card unless there is no card in their hand that can be played without the count exceeding 30. One cannot voluntarily pass. Once 31 is reached or no one is able to play, the player who played the last card scores 1 point if the count is still under 30, 1 and 2 if it is exactly 30. The count is then reset to 0, and those players with cards remaining in their hands repeat the process, starting with the player to the left of the player who played the last card. When all players have played all of their cards, the game proceeds to the show. Players choose the order in which to lay their cards in order to maximize their scores. Experienced players refer to this as either good or poor pegging or pegsmanship. If one player reaches the target, usually 61 or 121, the game ends immediately and that player wins. When the scores are level during a game, the players' pegs will be side by side, and it is thought that this gave rise to the phrase level pegging. Once the play is complete, each player in turn, starting with the player on the left of the dealer, displays their own hand on the table and scores points based on its content in conjunction with the starter card. Points are scored for. The dealer scores their hand last and then turns the cards in the crib face up. These cards are then scored by the dealer as an additional hand, also in conjunction with the starter card. Unlike the dealer's own hand, the crib cannot score a 4-card flush, but it can score a 5-card flush with the starter. All scores from 0 to 29 are possible, with the exception of 19, 25, 26, and 27. Players may refer colloquially to a hand scoring 0 points as a 19 hand. Muggins is a commonly used but optional rule, which must be announced before gameplay begins. If a player fails to claim their full score on any turn, the opponent may call out Muggins and peg any points overlooked by the player. A match, much like tennis, consists of more than one game, often an odd number. The match points are scored on the cribbage board using the holes reserved for match points. On a spiral board, these are often at the bottom of the board in a line with 5 or 7 holes. On a conventional board, they are often in the middle of the board or at the top or bottom. In a 2-player game of cribbage, a player scores 1 match point for winning a game. Their opponent will start as dealer in the next game. If a player lurches, British, or skunks us, their opponent reaches 120, 1 points before their opponent scores 91 points. The player wins 2 match points for that game. If a player double skunks their opponent, reaches 120, 1 points before their opponent reaches 61, they score 3 or 4 match points for the game, depending on local convention. If a player triple skunks their opponent, reaches 120, 1 points before their opponent reaches 30, 1 points, they automatically win the match. Double and triple skunks are not included in the official rules of cribbage play and are optional. There are several different formats for scoring match points. Visually, cribbage is known for its scoring board, a series of holes, streets, on which the score is tallied with pegs, also known as spillikins. Scores can be kept on a piece of paper, but a cribbage board is almost always used since scoring occurs throughout the game, not just at the conclusion of hands, as in most other card games. Points are registered as having been scored by pegging along the crib board. 2 pegs are used in a leapfrog fashion so that if a player loses track during the count, 1 peg still marks the previous score. Some boards have a game counter with many additional holes for use with a 3rd peg to count the games won by each side. There are several designs of crib board. Each of the four 30-point divisions of the cribbage board, 130-30, 160-61, 90, and 91. 120 is colloquially called a street. Being at 15 points would be on First Street, being at 59 points would be on Second Street, etc. The ancestor of cribbage is Noddy, a game for 2 or 4 players, each receiving just 3 cards and playing and scoring in a similar manner to modern Cribbage. However, instead of scoring 2 points for reaching 15 or 30, one called hitter, players scored the number of constituent cards making up the point. In addition, there was originally a third point at 25. Players also scored for pairs, priles, runs, and flushes, as in cribbage. There was no crib, and game was 31. Costly colors may have developed separately from Noddy, as it retained several original features that are no longer part of cribbage. Again, only 3 cards are dealt. There is no crib, and it uses the same scoring scheme for points at 15, 25, and 30, one or hitter. What is new is that deuces play a similar role to jacks and that players may score for color, having 3 or 4 cards of the same suit or color. 4 cards of the same suit are costly colors, hence the name. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to please like and subscribe. If you have a topic you would like to suggest, leave a comment.